will take a while before she's logged in.
Yeah.
Hey.
Putting on the camera,
Oh yeah.
audio,
Yeah.
so she can hear it.
It works? You hear me? Okay. Oh,
Hello,
perfect.
hello.
Hello. Good. That's good.
I can see it's moving.
Awesome drawing.
Amazing, I wonder.
Yeah. Ja, ja, goed.
So, do you know your?
Ja, Juliette was around. Nou, Jade has this operation she had in her foot. So she's totally disabled now. My father's there, he arrived yesterday, but yeah, I cannot stay away. But next week I would stay.
Ja, ja, ja.
Nee, maar well, it was very painful. She's okay. It's already much less. I mean, yesterday she already kind of walked around, but they're already in the shower. It's just tiny bathroom, right? Yeah, exactly. It's super tiny. You can put a chair in there whatsoever. Afterwards, there will be gymnastics in here.
Yeah. There goes the right up.
Just continue during the presentation.
Already prepared. So if I'm waiting around.
Do a warm up.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to-
With that? Yeah.
Everything was off. So then he goes, "Can't you read them?" And so, the next one is already. Yeah, because I don't. Ah, you didn't. Oh, yeah. This one is
Yeah, let's see. It's good. I'll say some good. Yeah, I don't know. I think either at the end or the beginning. Thanks. You're welcome.
Sure. I forgot my glasses. Oh, best. No. Nice illustration by Nicholas. Male. Sure, there's a meaning to that. So, yeah. Ich habe das gehört, ja. Busy. Sabato. Dove? Sì. Ero andata sabato. Era poi amichevole, super friendly.
I think I will start. Thank you all for being here, large numbers. Very happy to see many of you. So yeah, I subscribed to do a colloquium this spring, knowing it would be shortly before I would be leaving the Vogelweide. So for me, it's quite a special presentation to give here, because it's not just about my work, but it's also about what I've been doing here for the past 10 years. And so we'll be talking mainly about this guy, the honey buzzards. But I will also talk about red kites, which has been my main work for most of the years I've worked here. And I also want to talk a bit about the people aspects, like us humans, and maybe, well, to start with that, I often ask myself the question, what am I doing here? Why am I studying birds at the Swiss Ornithological Institute? I really thought over this, and I would like actually first to ask you, what comes up in you? Why are we here? Why are you here? What's with these birds? And you can shout, just whatever comes up in you. Funding. Funding. So, for some reasons, it's a job, it pays, right? Yeah, true. Anything else?
Flying high.
Flying high.
The sky is the limit.
The sky's the limit. The birds make you fly high.
Yeah.
Yes.
Passion.
Passion, I like that one. Yeah. Passion. Anything else? Good. So, to come with my own explanation, I think it's quite simple. I think I just feel very connected to nature, very dependent on nature. I mean, I eat nature. You are all eating nature right now, actually. A good day. We breathe nature every day. And in fact, on and in my body, there's 10,000 different species, life forms living there. And it's not just because I happen to have a very unhygienic lifestyle or whatsoever. No, every person in this room is an ecosystem of its own. It's a product of evolution of life on this planet for 4 billion years. So how can you not feel curiosity, fascination, and admiration to life, to all that lives? So for me, it's totally natural that I just happen to have fallen in love with birds. They're everywhere, they're very pretty. If you don't see them, you hear them. And for me, this happened around the age of 4 years. I started asking my mother for every bird that I saw, what is that? What is that? So she bought me this bird book, and I learned reading with that book. And then later on, I joined some volunteers who were monitoring and ringing birds of prey. And I kept doing that work for like 15 years, also throughout my study, wildlife management. And every Sunday morning, I was out there in the forest. And then in 2013, I was already here in this institute, doing an internship with Hoopus and Rhinex in Wallis. And a year later, there was Rien van Wijk, where I worked with, who wrote me an email. Yeah, there's this project in Red Kite starting and a PhD advertised there, and it would be really something for you to work in this project. So I didn't apply for the PhD, but I visited actually in 2015 already for a long weekend, climbed trees, etc. And came back the year after to work in this project. And I stayed for 10 years. And then suddenly I could do what I love doing most, not just on Sunday mornings, but every day of the week, 7 days a week, 10, 15 hours. We went totally crazy in those, especially those first years. So for 8 years, I was every season in the field with this red kite. I had a lot of red kite babies in my hands. We measured them, ringed them, took all kinds of samples, feather samples, blood samples, put up cameras, did experiments, feeding experiments. And especially with these nest cameras, I worked on a topic myself on parental care behavior in red kites, where we basically investigated if the birds, how the birds would react to experimentally feeding. So we put feeding platforms near some of those nests. And opposite of what I expected, the birds were attending the nest less when they would have more resources to do so. And especially during adverse weather, raining conditions. I won't go much deeper into this because time is short, but I hope you can read this paper soon. Yeah, what was very fascinating is this life histories of these birds, because we put GPS tags on them so we could really follow them from the start until the end. And of course, this part is very interesting to see when a bird dies and why it dies. But it's all about the story in between, what this bird does in its life. And what I found most fascinating is the moment that you saw a bird suddenly having this very narrow home range and it decided to settle a territory. It's such a decisive moment in their lives. And sometimes we were there really 2 days after a bird settled the territory. So in this case, it was with Benedetta. We were there and we watched this bird for like 2 hours fighting and fighting and fighting. And they do that for days. And this really decides the rest of their lives, where they will breed, how successful they will be. This bird is actually still known to be rather aggressive. It doesn't accept any drones. Yeah, and then the people part is, I had the honor to assemble and lead field teams for 3 years. And that's also amazing. I think we humans are also quite fascinating beings, right? I mean, cannot ignore them. So why switching to honey buzzards? Well, maybe part of the answer is that I do care about hygiene. So see a pile of trash hanging somewhere up a tree. You're probably looking at a red kite nest, right? So here you see this nest is full of like tissues, they're always there. You see here like a doggy bag full of dog shit. And I don't really want to talk about what this is and how it got up there, but some women might recognize what it is. Not great. So it's quite tempting to switch to this bird of prey that has the cleanest nests of all birds of prey, always this fresh layer of green leaves on there. And they don't eat honey, but they smell like honey. They have the best smell of all birds. I mean, some birds really smell good. I mean, people with hoopus, working with hoopus or barn owls, they might disagree, but yeah, just for the smell, it's also already a reason to get close to them. So what I did, I started in my own time to look at honey buzzards in the same study area where we did the red kite project, searched for nests, put up cameras to document their behaviors, and also looked a bit at wasps. So here's your wasp nest. I'll also talk a bit about wasps. So these cameras, I programmed them on taking 1 picture each minute during the daylight. So we could really standardized way document the parental behaviors like nest attendance, but also prey delivery, nest visits. So this is the amount of pictures by now that we've put into Excel lines with information, resulting in more than 11,000 prey items recorded. So it starts with finding the nests of these birds, and it's not so easy. These birds are very elusive and they hide their nests really, really well. So in order to find them, you first have to see these birds, and they're not easy to see. They often forage very far away from their nest, and they make these very long flights over 6-7 kilometers sometimes. And then in a long glide, they disappear somewhere into the forest. And then if you see that they carry a prey, which is not always obvious to see, then you can start searching. But yeah, find that exact location back in the forest. That's often a big challenge. And then, as I said, they hide their nests better than any other birds of prey species. So sometimes this is all what you see, a little part of the nest, and sometimes very frustrating. We really didn't find those nests. And what I did in some cases is just to look for the highest tree in the forest, climb up there and stay there for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. And these were really some of the happiest hours of my life, because it's in a complete different world there. You get very aware of how many species evolved in the crown layer of our forests. Specific bugs and flies that you never see if you stay in the forest floor. And you get to see these honey buzzards. Good. Then in 2021, I did a colloquium like I do here. And I managed to convince Woes Korman, who was the project leader in the Red Kite project at that time, and Murdy, and others in the Institute, to incorporate the honey buzzard project within the Red Kite project and continue this work within this infrastructure. And that gave a lot of options, because then I could use more resources, for example, to do wasp trapping. So measure the food availability of the honey buzzards, because wasps are their main food, social wasps. And then we could also look into, let's say, the implications of climate change, habitat, on how these birds behave, on what they eat, but also on what is available. And we continued looking at the diet use of these birds by using these cameras. So shortly about the honey buzzard, it's morphologically completely adapted to find and harvest social wasp nests. And what they do, basically, they take parts of this nest, the combs, which are filled with brood of the wasps, larvae and pupae, and that's what they bring to the nest and feed to the chicks. Sometimes these nests are hanging up in trees, like this one, and they just rip them out of the tree. These are short cycle species. They often do that. I will talk more about short and long cycle wasps later. But they also get them from the ground. So many wasps nest in the ground. And then they really dig a hole into the ground and almost disappear completely in there. And this is then this wasp comb full of larvae and pupae is the reward for that. And they bring those to their nests and carefully pick out the larvae and pupae and feed them to their chicks. And what's really amazing, if you want to study a bird like this, is that their main food comes in a package. This package stays behind. So we could collect this, but you also see it very well on cameras, on nest cameras. You see every prey item very well because it doesn't disappear very quickly. Although they eat also other things than wasps, I will show you later. They eat some vertebrates, frogs, birds. But first I want to go into the, let's say, the summer reproductive cycle of honey buzzards. So it's an obligatory long-distance migrant. They overwinter in tropical Africa. And then they arrive here rather late. So these are all nests where I had a camera already that were used in the previous year. So honey buzzards tend to reuse their previous year's used nest. If they don't reuse it, they often visit the nest the first thing they do when they come home. So I could really document their arrival date. So first the males arrive mid-May, then the female arrives. And it's very often some of the first pictures look at like this. They're very happy to see each other after the winter, but they're also in a hurry because within less than 10 days, the female lays the first egg. And then some 30 days later, the first chick hatches. Often they lay almost 2 eggs. And then after 45 days of chick rearing, the chicks fledge. But what's really cool is that these honey buzzards, they provide still post-fledging care to the chicks, but exclusively on the nest. So every prey item is they still give every prey item to the chicks on the nest. So we could really follow these birds from, especially these males, from arrival until departure, because this is the end of August. That's usually when they bring the last prey to their fledglings. And that's also after the last prey delivery, they migrate. This is really the period, end of August, the period of peak migration in honey buzzards. So what you see here already is that males are here for longer than females. And if we look at their nest attendance, which I could document well with 1 minute interval camera pictures, we see that the males also work harder when the chicks are there. Well, work harder. Let's say, maybe a bit dangerous to say that, but they incubate each 50% of the time. That's very rare in birds, and especially birds of prey. And then already getting into the results of their feeding behavior. This is the food in biomass brought per sex. And there we see that the males also bring like 75% of the food to the chicks. So again, they work hard. So why are these birds actually so much in time constraints and so shortly here? They're really just like 3.5 months here. It's not easy to raise chicks with such a long period of chick rearing. Well, they're here to profit of the peak of availability of wasps. So social wasps in winter, there's only queens. So it's not like bees that have a hive and there's always brood all the year round. No, in winter, there's only queens. And these queens at some point wake up and start becoming active and initiate a nest. And this nest will grow throughout the season. There will be workers, there will be brood. Then at some point, they will produce queens and drones for the next years. And the next year it will start all over again. And the nest dies out. And we have two different groups of wasps. We have like long cycle species that take up to 6-7 months to fulfill the cycle. And we have species that take up to, well, max 3.5 months. So that's something to keep in mind. And you see, this is the moment the chicks hatch, so they can still profit in a normal situation from both wasp types or groups. We can imagine, of course, with climate warming, which has an effect inevitably on insects, that this whole phenology might advance. And this could have, of course, implications for honey buzzards. So this is one of the things where we were especially interested in, especially with looking over the elevational gradient here in Switzerland. So shortly again about these wasps, there are really not many species of social wasps in Switzerland. So it's not so complicated. There's like 7, maybe I should have put one or two more on this slide. Different species use different kind of wood, which gives their nests and their combs different colors, which helps us for identification. And these are basically the 4 groups that I could easily or fairly easily distinguish on camera trap pictures, nest camera pictures, and also combs that I've been collecting when I have been doing nest checks. So there's 2 long cycle species, German wasp, common wasp, and the European hornet, which is also a long cycle species. It's a bit of a different wasp. It's also not going to play a big role for honey buzzards because they build their nest in like 3 cavities and honey buzzards cannot really enter those. They still prey a bit on it, but it will never be a very important prey source. So it's more about the other species that we will focus on. And I can actually already tell you this German wasp was one of the most common species in Europe. It doesn't play such a role anymore, in the diet at least of honey buzzards. So we'll first talk a bit about wasp combs that we have been collecting, or I've been collecting when I was climbing trees and checking those nests. From chicks that were very young, but also after fledging, we could still collect these combs because they bring them all on the nest and eat them there. We've been collecting and measuring around 5,500 of these combs in the past years. And here you see the difference between common wasp, which has this yellow colored combs, and other species that build combs made out of gray colors. And this difference between German wasp and this group of short cycle species is not so easy, but if you look well here, you see, for example, these little pillars at German wasp and rather ribs in the short cycle species. And this comb is also a bit thicker. So that's how we segregated between those 2 groups. But it's not always evident to see this difference. So to get into results, these are all the wasp combs that we've been collecting in 4 years. You see that there's 2021 actually missing here. And that's 2021. I don't know if you remember. Probably you removed this from your memory because it was a terrible year, terrible spring, terrible summer, very wet. And honey buzzards, there were no wasps. They were eating their own eggs. So they didn't reproduce in the whole alpine region. So not much data that year, unfortunately, but well, still interesting information. So what do we see here? Well, these are just this group of gray combs, so German wasp and short cycle species combined. And we see more or less 50-50 proportionally available in their diet. And there's a small year effect, an anomaly, 2022, or maybe that's a normal year, we will see later. And then if we look into this gray comb segment, then for 2 years we took a subsample, and there you see actually that most of these gray combs are from short cycle species. So again, what I told you already, this German wasp is not really playing a role anymore in this honey buzzard diet. And then I want to say, express my gratitude already to Marta Buri and the fact that we have a lab in this institute, which is really great because then you can do really amazing things. So for the short cycle species, we did DNA analysis to define like the ratio of different species within this prey group. And there we see that 2 species are rather dominant. That's the Saxon wasp and the median wasp. And then there were Dutch volunteers in the Netherlands have been collecting combs that I've been analyzing as well. And there we see more or less the same pattern. So 50-50 common wasp and gray combs, of which are heavily dominated by the short cycle species. Thanks to the DNA analysis, we see also a little bit of more variation in Switzerland, but the sample size is very small. So, and it's only 1 year of data that we used for the Netherlands, but yeah. I already want to say thank you also for Benedetta Catiti, who did most of the statistics here and had a lot of support from Pius and Louis for doing proper analyses here. Another example of how it can be great to work at a large institute and use the knowledge that's here at house. Good. Now's the question, has it been always like this? And thanks to this guy who has been spending the last 54 years somewhere up in trees in the Netherlands, who has been looking at honey buzzards and collecting combs, we could lay hand on a data set of 54 years in the Netherlands. And what we see here, that it's actually did not always, situation has been very different. So actually this gray colored combs, and we don't know if these are short cycle species or German wasp, have been rather dominant for a long time in the diet of these honey buzzards. So what changed? So maybe the short cycle species disappeared, maybe their phrenology changed, or maybe these are the German wasps that disappeared all over Europe. And there are actually, there's some proof for that. And then we have to take into account, these are just combs that we collected on nest, but there's always a bit of bias. So some combs fall apart a bit quicker, so you find them a bit less than others. So in the end, we want to look at the camera trap picture data. So here you see the moment a honey buzzard sees the light, the daylight for the first time. And from the moment they start making this noise, the parents get stimulated to collect food, mainly the male. Here you see a female trying to feed one of those eggs with a little hole. So that's the moment we could look in, I could really observe with the camera on this nest what they feed. So here you see a nice comb of common wasp. But as I said, they also feed some vertebrates. And it's actually quite interesting to get an insight in to what extent they feed vertebrates. And it's all frogs and bird nestlings. And what you see here already, these birds are not made for the kill, right? They're morphologically adapted to eat insects. But it's still in addition to their diet. So for every bird and frog, I just estimated the weight. And for wasp combs, I estimated the length and the width of each comb. And then I used data that I've been collecting on larval and pupal weights of the different species and species groups to make a formula and really calculate the weight of each prey item that was brought on the nest. And that results in this. So this is basically the diet of the honey buzzard. So these are 6 nests that I show you here that I've been observing from the moment the chicks hatched to the last feeding at fledging. So this is the amount of food a honey buzzard uses, 5.5 kilos, to raise a chick of around 800-900 grams. And 4 kilos or 3.5 to 4 kilos of that is insects, wasps. That's quite an achievement. There are not many birds that manage to collect so many insects in a year, but because this honey buzzard uses this niche of this huge concentration of insect protein, which they can also transport to the nest, they're able to do so. What you also see is that actually these frogs, it's quite a big share of their diet. So if it becomes a bit more, we should call it a frog buzzard maybe. And again, as I already told you this German wasp is not playing a big role in their diet. So here we see the phenological change within the season of the diet of the nestlings of honey buzzards. And what we see is actually this yellow line are the short cycle species, and this orange line is the common wasp, which is the only long cycle species that really plays a role for honey buzzards. And once probably this German wasp was part of this long cycle species that played a role for honey buzzards, but it doesn't do anymore today. And then this decrease of short cycle species that fits, of course, into the fact that they have a short reproductive cycle, and at some point they're not available anymore. They're done reproducing. So then the honey buzzards are basically only using one wasp species, which is not a very broad diet breadth. Good. Then we monitored the wasps as well, so the food availability. For that, we used beer traps. We just put a very cheap lager beer in there, so don't worry, nothing precious was wasted there. But yeah, again, the human part. So here's Frank filling these bottles, and somehow the guys were doing this. They were always getting happier and happier. Right? At the end, we had 1 or 2 liters short. Very fascinating, mysterious. Yeah. So we put these traps, 110 traps over the elevational gradient. So square 1 is the lowest square, and square 11 is the highest square. And then we looked into the availability. So we trapped throughout the breeding season of the honey buzzard, so start of July until the end of August, 5 rounds. And here you see these elevational squares. And I grouped actually 2 years with a rather cold and wet spring, 23 and 24, and a rather warm spring year. And there we see already quite a difference. So be aware this is a logarithmic scale. So the difference between the species is rather big, but also within the season. And we see what we expected in a warm spring, that early in the year, the wasp peaks rather early. And over the elevational gradient, we don't see a huge effect here. But in the years with a more normal, bit colder spring, we see that the wasp peaks later. But we also see that they somehow increase over elevation in time. So this shows what we expected, that this phenology of the short cycle species higher up in the mountains is clearly different. And then the question is, do we see that in the diet of the honey buzzards? So for that, I've split all the nests in 2 groups to make it easy. And this is what we see. Indeed, the higher nests, they use much more of the short cycle species. And this gives us also an indication how maybe the situation was back in the 70s, 80s, when Rob Bijlsma, this guy that I showed you, collected his combs on Dutch honey buzzards nests. And also how the situation was here in the lowlands when temperatures were still lower in spring, of course. So that's actually the result we expected to find. So yes, I think in the lowlands, these short cycle species, they became earlier in their phenology, and for that play a less of a big role in honey buzzard diet. What we also see in this wasp trapping data is that there's large yearly fluctuations. And this is also something that has been found in other studies, that a good predictor of a good wasp year is actually a bad wasp year. If you have a bad wasp year now, next year there will be many, at least for this common wasp. And what's really cool, there's volunteers, but there's also the University of Wageningen with Ralph Buy, who have been starting to use the same protocol as we use here to trap wasps. And in Czech Republic and United Kingdom, there's 2 volunteers that are also somehow crazy about honey buzzards. I hope you by now understand why. But like this, we can also compare a bit like regions Europe-wide. So I hope they will be continuing trapping wasps for a long time. Yeah, so yeah, I submitted a lot of these receipts with beer to Abacus, and somehow I never got a critical question from the finance department about it. We do with this information as you like. So good, what do we know so far? So we know that this common wasp is very, very important for the honey buzzards within their diet. But it hasn't been always the case, and it's not everywhere the case. So we see in the higher regions in Switzerland, they still use also other wasp species. But somehow in the lowlands and also in the Netherlands, it's quite dangerous for a bird to rely on mainly basically one species of prey. You know, we know that the German wasp really diminished in large parts of Europe. And what happens if the same happens to this common wasp? But yeah, don't forget about these vertebrates, because these frogs, they form quite a vital part of the diet. And if you saw these proportional graphs, you see that especially early in the years, it's sometimes 50% of their diet. So that makes me wonder, what do the adults eat 35, 40 days before the chicks are hatching? What is available to them? And luckily, we could observe like courtship feeding on nests that were occupied the previous year and reoccupied. And I could observe like 274 feeding events from the male to the female. And these are almost all birds and frogs. So this is like the moment in May they arrive. These birds really rely on those vertebrates. So it's not just about wasps. And this is still a vital part of their diet. So without frogs and birds, without any diversity, these birds, this insect specialist, still has probably a problem. I also looked a bit into molt. I could look, so what honey buzzards do, they molt some feathers here in Europe, if they can. So they start with the inner primary, and the rest, they can go up to 3, 4. And the rest they molt in Africa, but not all years. So here are 3 years with high wasp availability and 3 years with low wasp availability. And it's pretty obvious the effect of food availability on how these birds look like when they fly around in August. So if you look at pictures of honey buzzards in August, you can just already tell if it's a good or a bad wasp year. But you can also see a clear difference between the males and the females. The females molt more, again, because the males probably have to work harder. And there's also a difference between birds that don't breed and do have a brood. So the broodless birds, they molt more. So very clearly, somehow, the trade-off in energy expenditure to molt in relation also to food availability and the status of a bird. Another bycatch of all this camera trap pictures data is that I could document the whole building behavior. So the male builds the nest, and then the female maintains the nest when the chicks are there. At the start, they use N green branches and non-green branches, and later mainly green twigs, probably to camouflage this nest well. For 5,000 twigs, I could also note down what species of branch they used. So they mainly used the European beech. They seem to have a preference for that. And then there's some special behavior, because again, how do these birds do that? They arrive here, and then within 10 days, they have a partner, a nest, and lay an egg. It's basically impossible. What if you arrive and you have to find a territory, settle this territory, get a partner? It's impossible. So what do? Sometimes I had these nests, and mysteriously there was no egg laid in there, but the birds, and then mainly the males, they kept maintaining this nest, putting fresh green on there regularly. And that's a trick for these birds to prospect, to prepare for the next year. And what I often saw in this nest, because I anyway had a camera, so I followed how these birds were behaving there, is that many females were visiting those nests. So in this case, this male lured 8 different females on this nest. And that's how, of course, if you have already a partner or many potential partners, it's easier when you arrive back here in Europe, that you have already a nest and many potential partners. And this is actually an activity that's mainly, so most of these females, they arrive on those nests when they cannot even lay eggs anymore. There's no chance to still reproduce. It's really to prepare for the next year. And this is also the period that people mainly see honey buzzards actually flying around. And what I found also really cool is when these birds meet each other in nests and they're in this courtship kind of position, they often have these tiny, tiny pupils. And it was quite fascinating. And what I found out is that it's actually called eye pinning. It's known, for example, in parrots, and it's described as a behavior in how birds communicate emotions with each other. So it's pretty cool. Honey buzzards do that as well. And then these honey buzzards are also individually identifiable. They all have their own fingerprints. So here's a male. He was called Will. He's actually likely dead by now. 3 years in a row, which made it possible for me to make kind of life tables and also look into yearly survival, like return rates. And especially for these males, I think this is pretty close to true survival, because as soon as these males have a territory and a nest, they don't emigrate anymore. They come back to that place. And again, you see that these females have a higher survival rate, and that's, again, explains a bit. They can migrate earlier to Africa where everything is better. They work less hard during the breeding season, etc., etc. So might be part of an explanation. It's simplistic maybe. But it's pretty cool to to get this kind of information. Together with Max Planck Institute, you also put tags on juveniles. I won't go much into that, but these juveniles, they stay here for 2 or 3 weeks, as Hans Schmid already once showed during his PhD. Which was cool to follow. Yeah, and then I talked a bit about wasp nests. So I've also been monitoring wasp nests that I happened to find in the study area. And I was very interested in seeing if there's competition between species for this wasp brood. And what you actually see is that pine martens and European badger, they very often harvest those nests. So they really pose a competition to these honey buzzards. Now, what this fox is doing here, that's really, I think, not very smart. And this lynx, there was a movie actually, it gets stung at some point by the wasp. Yeah, and then the people part again. Because again, I think we're quite fascinating beings ourselves. Maybe it sounds a bit arrogant as a human to say that, right? Yeah. What I really like about us humans is our creativity, our inventiveness, like how to protect yourself from the sun, the whole day out there. Or what to think of using a cucumber to hold up your binoculars. Pretty amazing, isn't it? So yes, and there's many, many people I would like to thank here. So many volunteers, also many colleagues who joined sometimes just for a day, partially volunteering as well. I would like to highlight Lara Gross, who was there almost since the start. It was really huge support. And especially also Benedetta, Katiti, Benny, who was very supportive since the very start of this project. And I think thanks to you and your unconditional support, I really could be who I am. I really could spend all these hours out there, be the naturalist that I am, while having the confidence that you would help me to make something out of all. I'm very thankful. And last but not least, I want to thank Jade Méric de Belfond, who worked with us for 3 years in the Red Kite and Honey Buzzard project. And during that time, she became the mother of my child, Otis. And yeah, I mainly want to thank the both of them for very frequently reminding me, often a bit too early in the morning, but reminding me that there's more to life than just birds. And then I want to end with thanking the birds. So I've written a little homage, a little, I say this, homage, tribute to the birds. And to the work I've been doing. So here we go. The smell of a warm forest in the summer heat. My skin is wet and sticky. Mosquitoes bite me in my neck. The sound of buzzing, hovering flies all around me makes me almost feel delirious. On the forest floor, I see a wasp nest, carefully opened by you. This is your forest, your home. The human thinks it's ours, especially in this country. We tend to maintain or to possess and to control every square meter. But it's yours. It has always been. I'm just a guest here. I'm here because I follow you. You fascinate me so much. You're so mysterious. It drives me crazy. It makes me wanting to be as close to you as possible. It makes me wanting to be you. September starts, the cold nights. Wasps make place for mushrooms blooming everywhere, on forest floors as leaves are falling. Summer bird as you are, admirer of the sun, you left to Africa with its evergreen tropics. You are so right. Sometimes I wish I could be you. Get into your skin and wear those beautiful feathers. Look at this world through those stunning yellow eyes. Your world must be so big, so sunny, so green, blue, yellow, orange, and green again. It must be beautiful. It must be perfect. I can't wait for it to be May again, when you can be seen forming streams and rivers in blue skies, after which you silently dissolve into our forests for another summer season. Please, birds, keep telling me your stories. Write them in the skies and paint them on your eggs. And never, never stop sharing your infinite beauty with me. But for now, thank you. Thank you, Icarus and Isabel. Ethan, Eleonora, Chloe's, Jolene, Jim, who loved making grumpy selfies. Felix, Fleur, Achilles and Aida. And many, many, many more. Thank you also to the wasps, the flies, the moths, the shrubs, trees, lichens, fungi, and ferns, and all others that shape these forests. Thank you for making life in this place, and for making my life in this place a little bit more worth living. Thank you. So we still have some time for questions, if there are any. Good. Lenny?
I just think you left us a bit speechless. But well, you always leave me in awe with your presentations and your passion about, well, birds in general, but honey buzzards in particular. So I think the only question I feel like asking is, out of all of the things, all the behaviors, all the incredible aspects of the honey buzzard that you discovered, what is still the big secret, the big aspect that you really would like to understand more about the honey buzzard that you didn't already?
The first thing I think of is that I would like to follow them to Africa.
Like personally?
I would like to, yeah. But somehow the nice thing of nature is that it's a book which is infinite. You know, these stories, they're infinite. So there are always secrets, new things to discover, like this eye pinning, the little sounds they make. It's very fulfilling just to look at this bird and enjoy its beauty and figure out things and how it lives and how it was evolved and what it does here. Of course, the interaction with the diet and changes in the world are very interesting, very fascinating. So I think that's something where I'm very curious how the future is going to look like for this bird. So I could say, yeah, I'm very looking forward to 10, 15 years to see how things are then. Yeah. I don't know if this is a question to answer. Any more questions? Good. And Murray still wanted to say something.
Another question. Well, what you didn't, well, I'm just not aware, what you didn't show is that, or mention is if birds would actually also adapt their phenology in some way, or did you mention it? Like, is there any change in migration and timing?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. I will repeat for the people home, I think. So if the birds change their phenology in time, yes, they did change their egg laying date. So that's the only proof that there is that they changed their phenology in the Netherlands, because there is also long-term data on that. And on migration, there's fairly to no proof that they changed their phenology. So the answer is partially yes. So the time between arrival and egg laying probably got shorter. But that's all what's have been found so far. Yeah. Who's?
So this morning in the train you said that we're gonna today hear history essentially, right? And the reason for that is that the Asian hornet is now getting more abundant, and that it's gonna switch the entire system essentially, potentially becoming the dominant prey.
Yeah.
So about this Asian hornet, I mean, first question maybe, did you already observe it in the diet, like on your nests? That's the first question. And the second one is there anything known about the Asian hornet, how high up it may go, you know, like elevation wise? So yeah.
So thanks, Urs, for this question. Well prepared on the train together. I actually prepared for this with a map and but Totally fell for it. No, so the question is basically, yeah, what's going to change now that the Asian hornet, which is a wasp, a social wasp species, potential prey for honey buzzards, entering Switzerland right now. And one of the questions was if we observed it already in the diet of honey buzzards, and the second question was if we and to what elevation you would observe it. So to answer your question is that we observed the Asian hornet, but not in the honey buzzard's diet yet. But the Asian hornet is arriving rapidly. It's colonizing Switzerland rapidly. So it's going to change a bit. And one of the things that you have to think of is that there's all these are bee stands in Bern, around Bern. Chumi sent me this one. There's a huge density of insect biomass that's not available to honey buzzards. They cannot open a beehive. But through the Asian hornet, this becomes available to honey buzzards. So yes, everything is going to change. So what we saw here today is history. It's going to be all different in 10 to 15 years. And it has been seen in Spain already. So we didn't see the prey in honey buzzard diet, but it has been seen in Spain already that it's in Spanish study that it's one of the largest share of the diet of honey buzzards. So they will definitely exploit this prey type. The elevational question. So the Asian hornet is, as far as I know, not really a cold species. So also in Asia, it's rather in warmer regions. So thanks to climate change, this Asian hornet now reached all the way up to the Netherlands and also maybe a bit higher in Switzerland. But there is a limit there. It's not as good cold adapted than quite some short cycle species like Norwegian wasp and red wasp that are native here. Yeah. But indeed, everything will change. So it was really the last time window in history, that sounds dramatic, but that we could study wasps and honey buzzards in this region, in this country, before colonization by Asian hornets.
Yeah, thank you. You talked a lot about food availability and so on. I was wondering, how do you see that they are actually limited by food availability at all in their huge territories that they have, or do they just feed upon a very abundant or a resource that nobody else really feeds on as such?
So I think they have large territories because food is limited. So and if there would be more food available, territories would be smaller. This is something that, as with many birds, has been observed. It's the case also for honey buzzards. So and yes, we did see, for example, in 2022, you saw that this wasp peak was rather early and then it crashed. And there you really see that these chicks, in the last weeks of their life at the nest, they really got less food than the bad wasp here later. So this whole story is, of course, more complex because also these juveniles that then fledge, they still have to spend here 3 weeks and feed themselves. So maybe in a very good year with a lot of reproduction, no one or very few will come back in the end because they, from Africa, these juveniles, because they had a bad period before they left on migration. And in a very bad year, birds often have one chick, or one chick survives that's then better fed. And there might be more food later in the year for these chicks before they leave on migration. But yes, no, food is definitely a limiting factor for these birds in many, many ways. And what's quite remarkable in honey buzzards, like what you saw, there was 1 year without even reproduction, but there's also many years where only between 20 and 40% of the birds, breeding birds, have actually really a brood that they raise. So, which is very, very low actually. So yes, food is very restricting. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for Asian hornets thing, like the birds. So some honey buzzards from Spain learn to prey on the seta, and like would Switzerland birds have to reinvent it, or would we make this person from Spain?
Okay, so how the birds learned to prey on Asian hornet without knowing this prey, right? That's basically your question. And your question is if the birds would learn it here by themselves, or it has to be birds dispersing from other regions where they know the. So they're quite philopatric, these birds. So the ones that are born here, they will also breed within a radius of like 200 kilometers. There's always outliers, but so there's no dispersal from regions in Spain to here. From France, maybe yes. But I think these birds are just adapted to follow social wasps in the environment. So they will also follow an Asian hornet, just like any other wasp, and then find their nest. So I think they don't need to, they learn it intrinsically. They're adapted to find these nests. So it's a new wasp species, but I think it's easy for them to find them.
Maybe last question, because
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I will, you know, you said you're hanging 5 hours on it, so maybe you can use the time to, if you feed the combs with larvae and pupae of any type, will they feed the chicks?
Sorry, what's your question again? If you feed the,
Yeah, if you feed the empty combs with any kind
Oh,
of.
you fill them?
larvae, You
Yeah.
fill them, you
Yeah.
are anyway 5 hours on it.
no. I try to be as short as possible on these nests.
They feed on the chicks with any kind of larvae.
Yeah, they would just take them out. I think they would see them as food then. Yeah.
You have to feed them.
Yeah. You can also put, for example, just like bee brood that you get from a beekeeper. You can feed them if you want. Yeah. You're planning to do feeding experiments?
We are talking about torture then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's possible. Thanks. Okay. Then I also quickly want to advertise, I'm actually already next week's colloquium, Wouter van Steeland is coming here to talk to us about mainly bird migration. Yeah, good. Then I leave this open and give you the word.
perfect. I mean, thank you very much again for. It was an amazing presentation, very emotional too. I could feel it. I want really to thank you not only for the presentation, but also for all the years you did work at the Vogelwarte in both of these projects. I think both of these projects wouldn't have been possible without your work. It's amazing what you did in this time, and thank you very much for all this cool stuff, and also for your patience and your effort you gave into this love of the birds. But I mean, you started as a tree climber in the Reckeye project, and it was somehow very quickly clear that's not your favorite bird species. But I mean, I think you liked that species too, but you always had your heart at the honey buzzard. So I got a honey buzzard from the animal care center, live one.
Oh, wow. I didn't see that coming.
So, and I want to thank you with that for all this time. I think I have never seen a honey buzzard at the ground, in fact. So I don't know whether it's really standing like that.
Well,
But I think it's quite well made, and
It's Isabella, no?
thank you very much. It couldn't move the pupilla, so
Yeah. So you asked them to kill it at the health. It's pretty good, actually.
I think it had a broken wing, so they euthanized it.
Lucky for me. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon.
So Valentine,
Thank you.
where and how do they find the frogs on the first floor?
Yeah, it's all common.
At the end, I was just
That
like.
area, and they go to one.
Not so much, I think. No. You liked it?
Yeah.
I was thinking because like digging ponds and is like one of the most common restoration.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, cool.
I know, I was like regretting sitting in the front.
Well, you do, you do in fact,
Yeah,
they're really huge,
yeah.
yeah.
They go
They need
for
ponds,
it.
yeah. The ponds in their forest, and hence, well, theoretically.
Spannend wäre, bis überhaupt die Wespennester hast. Weißt du?
Anyway,
Also, ja, ich sehe nie irgendwie.
Ja, du guckst ja nach oben.
Ja, natürlich, aber.
Ja,
aber weißt du, ja, wie finden die denn da? Ja, so ein.
Oh, yeah, maybe 15 nest ups, so that's, yeah, I cannot really do that. But you see lots of pictures of animals, and most of them there's bad news, and I find that's what I was mainly interested in, of course, I want to see the birds. But it's mainly also interested in documenting like competition for the food source.
they were really
Ja,
honest
dat
with
denk
the
ik.
cows.
But the links was great. I showed you the video.
For zo.
Awesome.
It gets done.
Yeah, cool done, yeah. We're standing looking at the camera. I can show you the video.
Ja.
Yeah, they do get sometimes you really see that they move.
And I think that, yeah,
But
I think
it doesn't harm
when
them.
like resonates.
And we
And
just
then
see
we
also.
follow like ourselves.
No, so there's a bit mysterious. So there's a bit like theories that they have whole fraction on their like smell of the feathers, which make the wasps. So these wasps, they send out like signaling pheromone, like alarm pheromone. They all smell it and they all. Probably they neutralize those pheromones. Smell.
Yeah.
Je ziet dat soms altijd.
Yeah, me too. I only know that because they.
Yeah, probably. That's just never been studied.
Dat is jouw.
But there are. Yeah.
Die aanpassing.
Camera traps on
That's
the.
pretty good.
Ja, goed.
Like one female I know since 50.
Also,
In the Netherlands, know what they do, doing every year.
That's why they found a report with
I would really love to.
Probably when they go lost, they got confused.
Even a smaller home range than here.
Exactly, ooh. More big.
No, they go separate. You saw it in this video, actually, simulation of a pair.
They
They do their own. Only water birds like geese and ducks, they migrate with their parents and families.
like common buzzards sometimes. But they go back in the same winter every
Yeah.
year. I think that was the only case.
They also.
Maybe the chick.
Yeah.
Chick-A and Chica.
Yeah, I mean, there's not so much data on sibling. Hasn't been analyzed if there's like a genetical component, if they go a bit more right in there, might be.
They don't have more,
But
the warblers are
GPS
really
data.
brown nesting.
it's more like where they're born, where they go. So birds in Finland, they go a bit more east in Africa and a bit more south. In the Netherlands, in Germany, they go a bit more west.
Ja.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, still my weight, man.
About the common ones.
From
No.
Although it's staying.
Yeah, it's stable. Yeah. But yeah, maybe they decreased also in the open habitats. So common wasp is actually everywhere, not only in the forest. And the German wasps are the open landscape.
Should we present?
That's used play the role.
Hello, Ellie. How are you?
So maybe they decreased the common wasp also.
I didn't know he was.
So, yeah. On the other hand, maybe there's now less competition and.
I wasn't here last week. I was in Hungary.
Data that is there, stable. And you see actually in our elevational gradient, there's more wasps in the lower common wasp.
It's a good strategy.
Warm, there's still
I want to congratulate him.
Because I mean, if they rely now so much on this
Very
company.
impressive. Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of limiting factor. If there are common wasps.
Yeah.
It's more or less okay, and if there are no common.
Yeah, we see that generally, it's like, because if you see the yearly differences, you see it's mainly the common wash between makes high peaks, and the other species, they stay a bit, they move a bit. So, and then with the mold and everything, the reproduction, we see that's the common wash that affects all this.
Yeah.
Others of white from France.
That's the limit.
Some bird watching with the.
Yeah, thanks. It's really.
It's a boy.
Yeah.
But that you want to have
Like
No,
just.
no.
Like study art.
That's not, that's
I'm gonna totally. Oh, yeah.
I'm just going to say.
Yeah.
Climbing a tree is
Oh,
probably.
taking down. Who gave it to me, and he's een month bevelen before they love. They have to.
Yeah.
Honestly, congratulations. That was fascinating, really.
Thank
I was bullying you, but maybe you can listen like that.
You can.
Really, I learned a lot today, a lot. From the zero to, I didn't know anything about this.
Yeah.
And then at the end,
It's more
I became
effort,
so
it's
emotional, I started to cry a little.
Really?
I had to hide myself, you know? I was like, oh my God. Stupid girl is crying now. So it was, no, I was very emotional. Also, you dare to express your personal relationship. That was nice. We don't do that. We usually speak dry science.
I know, yeah, this is how I am, I'm more like.
Very nice.
I mean, that's my question, why do we do this, why do we, we want to conserve nature, we like birds. That's really to answer this question. Yeah, they can, well, it's only 5 people left. Is Eileen still listening? Hey, Eileen. Oh, that's it.
That's not like 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello.
Anything.
You were telling me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this is often described as an adaptation, like the
No, I mean,
wash
it's
cannot
another
get in,
one.
it's this long, but I think it's rather, I believe rather it's the water purity, because they go a lot in the ground to dig up wash.
And the pupilla can even be smaller than this one?
Yeah, much smaller. Yeah, this one is not eye pinning.
Even smaller.
Yeah, with this eye pinning, it's really, they really
Super
constrict.
Nice. I have never seen a man who did this for me.
Eye pinning, well, would be a bit.
I've seen a lot like that. Like angry eyes or big eyes. I have even from